Kia ora, welcome to Women Power. This week we're looking at the family court and also discussing misogyny in popular culture and roast busters. In the family court, the Care of Children Act requires judges to make the welfare and best interests of children the paramount consideration when making decisions. But when women raise serious safety concerns about fathers, often these are ignored and the woman is accused of engaging in alienation. The family court prioritises children spending time with their fathers over other considerations. This results in the bizarre situation of mothers obtaining protection orders due to the father's violence, but the father still spending lots of time with children. We had hoped to speak to women who had recently gone through the family court to hear about their experiences. But because of the confidentiality rules around the family court and the women's own concerns that speaking out could affect future court decisions or impact negatively on their children, we can't do that. Legally, and in terms of the children's welfare, it's too risky for women to speak out. So now we talk to an academic about the research she has done into women's experiences in the family court. Kia ora, Vivienne, welcome to the program.
Kia ora, Katrina, it's great to be here.
The family court, I think, in its 30 years of operation has done a pretty poor job of explaining to the public actually what it does, and I think that's left fathers' rights groups to fill the vacuum and incorrectly claim that they're unfairly treated in the family court.
I think you're right. The fathers' rights movement has done a very good job at persuading all of us, and I mean by all of us I mean the general public as well as professionals in the family court, that the family court's been biased against them. And they've used as evidence the fact that fathers have seldom got primary residency as support for the claim that the family court's biased against them. And they've asked instead that the family courts operate in a fair manner to fathers, by which they mean that fathers should get equal or near equal care. But of course that's only one way of understanding what fair means, so we might want to think that a fair arrangement actually reflects a pre-separation care arrangement. So what we know in intact families is that mothers still do most of the care work. They do about double the amount of care work that fathers do. And perhaps more importantly, within intact families, fathers are seldom alone doing care work with their children. So fathers spend less than 10% of the time that they're doing care work with their children alone, in contrast to mothers who do about 30% of the care work alone. So if we were really thinking about what was best for the child, we might want to think about what kinds of arrangements produce quality parenting. And quality parenting is much more likely to occur in a context where a parent who's been doing that work is given primary residency.
And the family court actually bends over so far backwards to make sure that fathers have contact with children that actually it sometimes places the children at risk, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. What we've seen over the last 15 to 20 years is the courts moving more and more to privileging contact with fathers almost at any cost. So even if mothers are reporting that the father's been violent and abusive, neglectful, or has a major problem with drugs and alcohol, the family courts continue to provide fathers with contact time, substantial contact time, and even, in some circumstances, primary residency. So that's what we're privileging far more than children's safety.
And women who are raising these issues about safety and domestic violence are often accused of alienating the children from the father, and they're not believed.
And that also is a big problem that we're seeing in the family courts at the moment. It's such a big problem that women are actually often quite silent or hesitant about raising issues about the father's capacity to care safely for their children. And of course what we also do in that is we create an intolerable bind for mothers, because we require mothers to be protective of their children. So we actually ask mothers who are with violent partners to leave those relationships. And that's to be a good protective mother. And then as soon as our mothers have done that, we actually ask these same mothers with the same fathers to actually let their children go, to be with these fathers. So it's a real problem.
And you've done some research into women's experiences in the family court. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, you're right. I worked with Julia Tolmie and Nicola Gavey, and all of us are at the University of Auckland. And we pulled together to do a small-scale qualitative study with 21 women who were in dispute over care and contact arrangements. And when we asked or solicited participants, we weren't particularly looking for women who'd had a history of violence or abuse, but about half of our sample who came forward had actually had that history. And about another third of that sample talked about partners who are coercive, domineering or bad-tempered. So those were the kinds of women that came forward. And that's not too dissimilar to the general population of people who are going through the family courts. And we found amongst those women, again, going back to that notion of the terrible bind, that they were trying to navigate a really difficult pathway between supporting their child's ongoing relationship with their father, but trying also to make sure that their child was protected and cared for. So that was, so that's the essence, I guess, or one of the big issues came forward.
And there's also Australian research now showing that it can actually be detrimental to children when they're very young to be spending overnights or extended time away from their primary carer. You know, we've had this emphasis on recent years, share, spend half time with each parent, but the research seems to indicate that that's not actually beneficial to the children.
So I think you're probably talking about Jennifer McIntosh's work she's a psychologist, I think at Melbourne University, and she drew on a large-scale study in Australia to look at what happens for children psychologically and emotionally, and this is preschool children, when they're either in shared care, primary care, or actually having daytime care. And what she found was that for children who are less than 2, when they spent as little as 1 or 2 nights away from their primary caregiver in a week, were actually far more clingy when they came home. And was it the 2 to 3 year olds, also they began to display behavioural problems when they were in shared care. So she and some of her other co-authors have issued a sort of cautionary note about shared care, particularly for preschoolers, but also actually for older children. She sort of pointed out that many parents aren't actually in a good position. They don't meet the prerequisites that are really needed for shared care. And she and her other co-authors have been particularly concerned about the use of shared care in disputed care and contact arrangements, because those situations are usually characterised by conflict, and conflict is one of the worst things that we can do for children who are in a separated family. So the best thing we can do for children in that context is often to limit their contact with the non-resident parent.
And what do you think can be done to improve outcomes for children and women in the family court? What changes need to be made?
I think there's a number of things that we need to do. First off, I think we actually need to take women's concerns about the safety of their children really seriously. And that means that we need to investigate them thoroughly to see what's actually prompting that concern. Those concerns are seldom malicious. They usually come out of a history of living and dealing with a father who's shown himself to be abusive, neglectful, or to have other kinds of problems that would cause us concern, alcohol and drugs being obvious other sources of concern. So I think we need to take those concerns seriously instead of trying to sort of sweep them under the carpet in an effort to reach a settlement, because I think that's part of the problem that we have at the moment.
Thank you, Vivienne.
Oh, you're welcome, Katrina.
Now it's time for the Woman Power fails and wins. The Woman Power fail goes to the defence lawyer who said that a Wellington woman raped by a bouncer in an alleyway could just have closed her legs if she didn't want sex. The defence lawyer claimed that the woman had made a false complaint to police 6 days later as she regretted having consensual sex with the man. The lawyer said, all she would have had to do was to close her legs. It's as simple as that. Why didn't she do that? The reason that she didn't do that was because the sex was consensual. As easy as that. Nova Peris, Australia's first Indigenous female senator, gave a powerful and moving maiden speech in the Australian Federal Parliament. Unfortunately, it went largely unreported as former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd announced his resignation. You can listen to Nova's speech on YouTube. Popular culture is overwhelmingly anti-woman. Songs, computer games and DVDs portray women as sex objects and degrade and humiliate us. The words of many popular songs portray horrendous attitudes to women. 2 Auckland law students decided to do something about this by parodying Robin Thicke's misogynistic song Blurred Lines. They wrote a song called Defined Lines and produced a video in which it is scantily clad men who crawl along the floor and are dominated. Let's welcome Adelaide Dunn and Olivia Lubbock to talk more about these issues. Kia ora Adelaide, welcome to the program.
Kia ora, thanks for having me.
And kia ora Olivia, good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
What did you think when you first heard the words to Robin Thicke's song Blurred Lines?
Like a lot of people, I think I just thought it was a catchy pop song, but once I actually had a look at the lyrics, on a deeper interpretation of them, they came across to me as being a bit sexist and definitely had some issues in terms of consensual sex and rape, particularly in the lines, I know you want it, the way you grab me, things like that.
And how did you get the idea of doing the parody?
Our friend Zoe kind of came up with the idea because we were doing this show called The Law Review, and it's quite classic to have a few parodies in the show. And we wanted to have more of a feminist element in the show this year, so we just found it to be the perfect chance to make a dig at misogyny because it was a very famous song, famous and infamous at the same time, so we think it was a good choice.
And was it hard to write your words?
Yeah, I mean, it was challenging kind of course, making them rhyme, making them match the rhythm and the metre of the original, but we kind of collaborated and we thought about concepts that we wanted to include, and then it was just a matter of kind of ordering them, making it make sense. It was quite fun, but yeah, it was hard.
And were you surprised by how huge the reaction was when your song got out there?
Yeah, definitely. I've said this to a few different people, but I really thought it would get 10,000 views and then that would be it. Just, maybe friends of friends and a few people around New Zealand. I never thought it would go international.
And why do you think it was so big, the reaction?
I think it came out at the perfect time. I think the combination of the fact that the song was so infamous and also the VMA's Miley Cyrus, Robin Thicke twerking incident, I think that brought the song back into light, and putting a feminist sort of slant on the song was definitely, what's the phrase? It came at the perfect time, basically.
Yeah. And what made you decide to do your latest parody, which was of Lord's song Royals?
Yeah, that wasn't Olivia and I personally, it was some of the other girls in the review who are really good singers, and what that actually was it was performed on stage at the show where we projected Defined Lines, which was in August, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So the girls, they wrote Royals together, but it was called Lawyers, our version, and they filmed it recently because they wanted to kind of have a memento and put it on YouTube. So it's been in the works for a while, but we're glad that they recorded it because it's pretty cool.
And what does feminism mean to you as a young woman?
To me, feminism means having the same rights as men, having the same rights as anybody else to do the things that I want to do with my life, whether it be in my career or choices about my body or anything basically. It does not mean to me hating men and eschewing bras and things like that.
And do you think young women have equality with young men?
Young women with young men, it's a difficult question. I think young women find it hard to kind of plan their careers and plan their families at the same time. I think young women in New Zealand have a good deal of equality so far, but there are always issues like about not being taken seriously, or when a young woman expresses her viewpoint in the realm of politics, law, people might think because she's a woman that she will automatically have a feminist stance, whereas for a man it can be more general, their point of view isn't precluded by their gender. I think that's the kind of main underlying issue that young women face.
And what do you think it says about our society, the issue that's arisen in the media over the West Auckland young men having group sex with young women?
I think the response to that has been overwhelmingly negative in the sense that people have, jumped in and said this is a really terrible thing that's going on. I think there are some issues to do with the fact that people are questioning whether the girls wanted it, the fact that they were maybe drunk at the time, or that they were friends with the boys and maybe wanted to be with them. But I think the majority of people know that this was rape. There are just, those few elements that are still worrying. Personally, I think that one of the issues that's come out of it is, are we telling our young women that they need to take precautions to stop being raped, when really I think we should be telling our young men, don't rape. That's how I see it.
Yeah, the public debate, it always seems to put the responsibility back on the woman, and the police early on were saying, oh, none of the young women has been brave enough to come forward.
Yeah.
Well, actually they had been, and why not ask the young men to own up to what they'd done?
Exactly, and furthermore, I think a lot of these girls are really young, some of them are 13.
Yeah.
It's a really big deal to ask them to come forward and to tell people about something that may be incredibly embarrassing and incredibly, to them, shameful. And telling people that they haven't been brave enough to come forward yet, I think that's a really poor choice of words.
And what do you think this whole issue says about our society and about whether women really have equality?
Yeah, it says a few things. I think some of the reactions have been disturbingly blasé, especially in that Willie and JT interview on Radio Live. I feel like the public reaction to this issue kind of says that we need to educate people more about rape and all the different forms it can take. It seems like people think that rape is, a guy jumping out of a bush in a park holding a girl down and raping her, which of course does happen, but rape can inhabit a lot of other spheres. It can happen in marriage. Someone can consent to sex one week with someone but be raped by them the next week. And I think that's it's probably the kind of thing that's been going on, and also it seems from the fact that these boys were making a Facebook page and they were being lauded by their peers for having sex with all these girls, kind of denotes a sexist attitude towards promiscuity, that these men can kind of have their conquests over young girls, whereas the girls are being shamed. And that is the opposite of equality. It's quite awful, really, and I think that really, it's good that it's being addressed, though. Hopefully some positives can come out of this really, really negative situation, that society can learn together that equality is still far away, and that we need to stop rape culture, stop victim blaming.
And all these suggestions that it's got something to do with what women wear, or that if a woman finds a man attractive and goes out with him, if he then rapes her, then it's not really rape.
That's another really disturbing attitude. A woman does not consent to sex through what she wears, or even through going out on a date with a guy. It's awful that that's an expectation, and I think that's another real problem about defining rape. And I just feel awful for all those girls who had to go through that. I can't even imagine. It's terrible.
It's horrendous. Thanks very much, Adelaide, and thank you, Olivia.
Thank you for having us.
Now it's time for News of the Week. White Ribbon Day is next Monday, 25 November 2013. There are many events around the country between Saturday 23 November and Monday 25 November. You can look online at the White Ribbon website, whiteribbon.org.nz, to find events near you. A seminar on effectively involving men in preventing violence against women is being held in Wellington, Gisborne and other locations in the week following White Ribbon Day. You can find more information on the Family Violence Clearinghouse's website. White Ribbon Anti-Violence Campaign Chair and former Principal Family Court Judge Peter Boscher said that the Roastbusters case was an example of how widespread misogynistic attitudes remained. He said that as a judge he sees an unrelenting diet of domestic violence coming into the family court with no let-up. The White Ribbon campaign is calling on men to support one another in standing up against abuse of women. Judge Boscher said that violence as a means of control was still viewed as normal by many New Zealanders. He said that there was no sign of major change. Make Your Move Missoula is a campaign by a group of American community organisations dedicated to ending sexual violence. You can check out their activities on their Facebook page. An influential group of chief executives is suggesting a no woman, no work principle to place pressure on suppliers to commit to diversity. The male Champions of Change group of 21 chief executives and 14 organisations has signed up to a supplier commitment which would affect $30 billion in procurement spending. The announcement came at the same time as a report by Business Council of Australia calling for recruitment shortlists and long lists of at least 50% women, if not 100% women, as well as unconscious bias testing for chief executives. 700 women in Spain have died as a result of domestic violence by their husbands or partners over the past 10 years. Former Prime Minister Zapatero introduced regulations in 2004 to end violence against women, and the government set up an organisation to take action, but little has changed. More than 600,000 women are subjected to domestic violence each year, but less than a quarter make official complaints. Almost 1 million children have been victims of domestic violence in Spain in the past decade. 46 have been murdered in 2013 alone. A new inter-ethnic and interconfessional non-profit organisation called Stop Veils, Shout Liberty has been set up in Italy to fight racism and violence against women. Organisers include 2 Italians and 2 women born to immigrant parents. A woman's success can lower her male partner's sense of self-worth, according to psychologists at the universities of Virginia and Florida. They conducted experiments which showed that men told their female partners had been successful registered significantly lower implicit self-esteem scores than those told that their partners had failed. The researchers concluded that some men automatically interpreted a partner's success as their own failure. Sweden is introducing a new rating to highlight gender bias in movies. To obtain an A rating, a movie must have at least 2 female characters who talk to each other about something other than a man. The entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, all Star Wars movies, The Social Network, Pulp Fiction, and all but one of the Harry Potter movies fail this basic test. Nearly a third of American women fighting in Iraq were raped by fellow soldiers, and a quarter of the men investigating those rapes were the actual rapists, according to a non-fiction drama based on a book called The Lonely Soldier Project, Testimony from Women at War in Iraq. Members of Connecticut's NCAA champion women's basketball team are taking a leading role in a national campaign in support of lesbian and bisexual athletes in women's sport. 4 members of the team have created a video saying that gay athletes are welcome at their university and bullying people because of their sexual orientation is not tolerated. Australian Governor-General Quentin Bryce said that Australia shared the worldwide disgrace of horrific violence against women at the hands of men. She said that she encountered stories of appalling violence against women wherever she travelled. Ms Bryce said that rape crisis centres and women's safe houses across Australia were full and countless women were awaiting refuge from horrific circumstances. Ms Bryce, at the end of her term as Governor-General, plans to promote a national discussion about human rights and the concept of neighbourhood in Australian life. Now it's time for the 5 action points from this week's episode. Make the interests of the child the priority rather than father's rights. Meet New Zealand's international obligations by ensuring the safety of children. Treat seriously mothers' allegations of neglect, abuse and violence. Do not assume that shared care is best for children. Recognise the importance of stability for children. That's our program for this week. Join us next week when we'll talk about why there are so few women at the top in the legal and business sectors. The numbers of women partners in large law firms and on boards remain pitifully small. Thanks for watching. Ka kite anō.